No, I just wanted to be able to make a comment at the right time. And so if I could do it physically, I'd appreciate that. I am happy to make a motion to support the budget recommendation at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Steve. So I don't, get over to panelists. I have 4 raised hands. I'm going to go down the order as I see them. Glenn?
Yeah, thank you. Andy, could you just explain? I didn't understand your comment that said one jurisdiction was going to use. I don't know what that means.
Some of our cities are paying, extra staff time and consultant time in addition to belonging to the roundtable. And so one jurisdiction had communicated with me that they would no longer be paying for their own staff time, but instead investing only in the roundtable.
So does that mean jurisdictions are putting in more money than what is shown on?
No, but they're pulling out. Some of the jurisdictions are doing their own work on the side as well. And because of budget issues, some of the, so as an example, let's say Sunnyvale, I know it's not Sunnyvale, but maybe you have staff that also assists you. And then maybe you hire a consultant on the side. And so as an example, maybe your jurisdiction in the budget budget proposal for your next fiscal year will eliminate your staff time, your personal staff time, but will still belong to the roundtable.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next on the list, I have Lisa.
Thank you. I had a couple questions about the material that we were given. The third bullet point, budget includes 17 meetings, ESA supported 9. Mm-hmm. So in the budget, were those 17 meetings full roundtable meetings that we budgeted for?
That was the estimate of what we thought that it was going to. We thought that we might have 17 meetings, but to produce each meeting, it costs more. So we did not produce 17 meetings.
Okay, and I try to understand for meeting is that the community now has a platform to voice their concern, and the volume of email and monthly agenda packets are quite large. So how does that, I guess, in Mountain View, I don't think public input adds to the cost of any meeting. So I'm trying to understand how that adds to the cost of these meetings.
Well, we do, the roundtable does respond, and the staff do respond to the public. That's always a cost. I mean, of responding, it's staff time.
So it's responding to the.
Well, it's receiving, responding, distributing. There are different ways that we could handle running the roundtable, but the administrative side is, it does cost money. I mean, it's staff time because you receive, you respond.
Okay.
Lisa,
when will we revisit or discuss the ESA's contract extension?
Well, so the contract extension is that would happen. I am the project manager, and usually the project manager, the staff are the ones that handle the whole process of the contract. And so that's how the Cities Association handled it. It was done with staff level, and I had a committee of various staff, city staff that worked with me, and county staff when we interviewed as well. So at this point, the Cities Association is in charge of the contract.
Okay. That's all the questions I have, but I do have some comments. I'm assuming we'll do those later, right?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Glenn's hand is still up. Glenn, can you take, if you don't have questions, can you take?
Because you're sharing the screen, I can't get back to the piece that lets me do
Got
that.
it.
Okay, I'll figure out how to work it somehow.
Then if you press the escape key, you'll be able to shrink it back down where you've got all the facilities.
Lisa, part of the first question you had was that frequently we get questions such as the one that generated the response today from Tamara. And it could have to do with pirate, which doesn't necessarily affect just the residents in Palo Alto. It can have effect on others. So this becomes a community roundtable for that reason. For that reason, then the costs are shared, just as they would be with South Flow. That may not affect Cynthia in Santa Cruz. So again, it's a shared cost because we are a community group. Rowena, I see you.
So sorry, no,
Yeah.
I guess I wasn't questioning that. I was questioning how public input is being handled. We leave it up to the members of our city council to respond to public input, as opposed to have staff respond to it. So that's why I was just wondering what was going on. And the comments are just sent to us via email as they come in, as opposed to packaged up.
Frequently with the questions, there's a high level of technical expertise required.
If the group would like to change, I mean, we can, you most certainly have if you would like to handle that differently, that's up for your decision, I think.
That would be something that we would have to put, I believe, on another agenda going forward. But I don't know. Does anybody else want to weigh in on this at this time? Lydia, I see you first, and then Anita.
So I just want to clear, I did put my hand on the side. So is that how we're going to do it, or shall I raise it virtually like this?
Well, I was going to get to you.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
The hands are all up, whether they want to talk about this or not. So what I will do.
Procedure.
We're winging this, right? As we go along, all of us in this together, literally. For the people that want to talk on this topic that Lisa brought up, would you wave your hands, please? And I called on Lydia. Okay, I see you guys.
I can also tell you, Lydia, Liang, Anita, Cynthia, Rowena. Have their hands up.
Oh, thank you, Andy. Yes, so I'm very glad that Lisa brought this topic up. I'm just wondering, as we go forward, for the most efficient use of funding that comes from all the different cities, would it be the right place for Steve and Evan to be responding to all the emails coming in from the public? If it's technical questions, maybe through the I think that would be through the member, the roundtable member, to submit to you, Marilyn, the chair, to decide whether it goes through Steve for technical answers. But I think that this is a topic that maybe we want to discuss, since now we've completed our strategic and work plans, and now we're really delving into the technical and legislative sides, in order to reach our goal of what this committee is all about.
Okay, I've noted that. Let's see, Cynthia, I saw your hand go up, right? Oops, unmute, please.
Happy to have the issues handled by staff at a technical level, as long as we, as members, see them. They're free to make their own individual responses as well. They have the email, they have the content of the information. And I'll just say that's frequently the way it happens for us in the city. There's particularly when it is a technical issue that's handled at the staff level, and individual council members will reply as they will. In addition. Yeah.
Okay, well, okay. Liang.
You're on mute.
Unmute.
Okay.
Great.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm trying to understand. So last year the budget was $250,000.
Mm-hmm.
And then the proposed for this year is also $250,000 for a whole calendar year, right?
Correct.
And 125 for this first half and 250 for the next fiscal year.
Correct.
Okay. Then according to the description, somewhere it says that the initial cost of setting up this roundtable will be higher because there were additional staff time to do pre-meeting before each meeting. But now this is not a new roundtable anymore. So how come the cost remains the same?
Well, we're hoping that that money will be turned over to now instead of having pre-meetings about how the roundtable is going to run. We're hoping that we'll be able to turn that into technical work, which is really what you would all like to see, is that our consultants do more on the technical side versus the planning side.
Okay, so are they keeping track budget of total number of hours
Absolutely.
spent?
Absolutely. I
And
sign off
those-
on that every month.
And those hours, we sign off on it every month. Mary Lynn signs off on it. The treasurer of the cities association signs off on it, as do I, before. And so you can look at we approve those and the board then approves them in the consent agenda.
I see. So that's why there were savings from last year, right? Because you actually keep track of number of hours, and we are being charged by the hour that they spend on the different matters, right?
Right. We pay for their time and yes.
So is there a single rate for one consultant, or there is separate rate for his assistant, for example, in
There are
admin?
There are different rates. There are different rates for all of the folks who work on the roundtable. And if Steve wasn't able to participate, then there is another consultant that we would that within the firm that he works with that would come, and he has a different rate. So yes, and they track all of that, and then they send it to us in a very lengthy
Monthly report.
invoice. Yes,
That makes sense. As for comments from or questions from the public, do we get copied on these questions, or is that compiled in a place that we might look up so we know what work they have performed?
well, they're usually in your packet as well. The agenda packets are usually at the end.
Oh, so it's all part. So you compile all of those as part of the agenda pack.
Yes.
Okay.
And any correspondence or anything is in your packet.
That's great. And then I see that in the scope of work, we were hoping that they will, like task number 4 is follow up on select committee recommendations, follow up on South flow recommendations. So do this mean that we were expecting that we will provide some recommendations, and then the consultants will help us follow up?
Yes, they're supposed to be. They're tracking they're tracking these needs for us, and that is part of what is expected of them.
And then when they
and then they bring it back to the roundtable. But
they
this
provide
past
update, but we haven't had recommendations, right?
No, I mean, Steve, do you want to weigh in on this?
You're muted. There we go.
Yes, of course, there are a number of recommendations regarding the select committee and South Flow committee work in the work plan, in our strategic plan, but also based on the roundtable discussion, we've developed over time a tracking list for all of those measures. And so we continually keep updates on them when we get them from the FAA. As all of you know, the FAA produces essentially a quarterly report on the select committee activity. And so we track that and then update that tracking. Anything that's significant that comes out of that, we bring to the roundtable and get it on the agenda for the next meeting.
Okay, so I understand that we decided on ESA because of their expertise on airport issues. However, among the task list, I did not see an item that I feel really take advantage of that. For example, it would have been good to know what other roundtable around the nation is doing or what recommendations they have recommended. If such information can be compiled. For example, I heard that in Boston airport, they have actually got the airport to accept to spread the flight path instead of just following the next gen. So this kind of information would have been good to know. I wonder whether one of the tasks could be providing this kind of information to the roundtable.
I've noted that, Liang. Thank you. Any further questions?
No, that's all.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Ma.
Thank you. Anita, thank you for your patience.
Or just two things. I want to endorse the idea of putting a future agenda item to discuss the most efficient way to respond to public communications that both respects our constituents who take the time to contact the roundtable, but also most efficiently use the precious staff time that we're paying for, which is a little bit different from my perspective than using our own city staffs. So just that, and then to agree also with Liang's most recent point about if there are unique ideas that come out of other roundtables or kind of best practice ideas, if there's a way to capture those. I'm just interested in us trying to accomplish our overall mission the best way possible. And so if we could get access to that kind of information, I know that Steve has an incredible network of people and can do that kind of thing. That's all I have.
Thank you. Rowena.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment about the budget here. My question really is, are we pretty confident that considering the projected revenues, the lower revenues because of COVID and a lot of the layoffs that we're experiencing in the area, that we're going to get the funding that we need to proceed?
Andy? You're on mute.
The budget situation in each of our communities is different, depending on your revenue sources and whether you rely a lot on business revenue, business tax revenue, or TOT. So that's a question for you all, and I will leave that up to you.
Andy, to date, have you heard from any cities that said that they were not willing to put in the amount that we had? I see you, Carlos, I'll get you. Any other cities that were not willing to re-up this year?
No one has notified me at this time.
Thank you. Rowena, did you have any further questions? Oops, you're on mute again. Still on mute. There we go. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we're still doing our budget, and you know, we're looking at a lot of things that will probably be lower, like our gas tax, and of course we don't have any business. So I will probably be asking Steve to get a hold of you in the next week or so when we finalize our budget.
Okay, you're at $1,027.31.
Yeah, and this has to do with everything, our participation in the forum as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Understood.
Okay.
Okay. Carlos, I saw you raising your hand. And then Lydia, I see you up with a on the panelist raised hand. Carlos?
Yes, in Santa Cruz County, our revenue sources have been hit very severely. We are dependent a great deal on our hotel tax and on our sales tax, and those revenue sources have been devastated. So I feel it's very unlikely that Santa Cruz County will continue membership in the Roundtable next year, given the size of the budget cuts that we are facing in the next months. I will be recommending that we cut out a lot of our expenses. In fact, we've had a hiring freeze and we're negotiating furloughs with our employees. We're looking potentially at a number of layoffs. And so given the dire situation of our budget, I will be recommending that the board not continue membership in the Roundtable, as well as a number of other organizations. We're basically cutting all of our budget down to core mandated services. And so all extra expenditures are just going to have to be cut. So we don't have, of course, that's going to be up to the board ultimately, but given the size of our deficit, we have a 23% deficit in our general fund next year, which is just double of what the experience was during the Great Recession, and the Great Recession was very difficult. So from our perspective, I think it's very unlikely we will continue membership past into the new fiscal year.
Thank you, Carlos. It's hard to hear the reality. Andy, did you want to respond? Or should I move on to
Nope.
Lydia? Okay, Lydia.
So what I was going to say, it has to do with the content of the of item number 3 before Steve made his motion, but it sounds like there are other community members who wants to talk about the budget. So I'll hold off if that's all right with you, Chair.
Sure, sure. Ed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To Rowena's point, this was a question period, so I was going to wait to make my comment during the discussion. But since she brought it up, Capitola seems to be in the same position that Carlos mentioned. I think we all are experiencing that position. And although we have not adopted our budget, we made the recommendation, goes for approval on June 11th. But inside that recommendation was that all unmandated memberships were going to be deleted, which is the category that this Roundtable falls under. So I'm not optimistic that Capitola will be returning either, just to make the shortfall. So to Rowena's point, she wanted to know who was in that position. We are definitely a city that's in that position. Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia?
Since we're over here in Santa Cruz County, I'll say that we're in the same boat, highly dependent on TOT and sales tax. We're looking at a $10 million deficit, and we haven't dealt with this particular issue, but we are looking at furloughs, reducing service, non-essential services, et cetera. So very much the same situation.
So,
yeah.
Madam Chair, if you're okay, I'll share the screen again and I will show you the spreadsheet taking out these communities and what the budget looks like at the same rate. Is that all right? Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah.
Hold on here.
Give us the headers, if you will, Andy.
Oh, goodness.
Or just tell us which column matters.
Okay, this column, the shaded column, is a column that matters.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I seem to have an issue with
right.
Maybe go a little bit smaller. Can everyone see that well enough?
Now that we know the column head, yeah, we're good.
Yeah, this one right here. This is population currently used. It's a census number from 2010. Anyone else that I missed? I just took out the Santa Cruz.
Rowena, what do you think?
Where is Montessorino? Did they get?
At the bottom, 23.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm not concerned with the budget the way it is now. What I'm concerned is if enough, if other cities drop out and then we have to handle the bulk of their dropping out, then that could be a concern for us. We have no businesses in Montessorino, so we have really no source of revenue other than the gas tax and property taxes, and a little bit here and there for permits.
Whoops.
So I would leave us on and until the figures change, then we'll have to talk about it.
Okay, so we'll leave you on right now.
Yeah.
Well, the communities that are really the hardest hit right now are the tourism industry. So that makes sense that, Santa Cruz and all of your communities are deeply affected. Not to say that we all aren't in some way.
Just gotten a message from Lisa Matichek saying that her internet connection is going in and out. I haven't recognized Kathy Watanabe or Glenn having to do with this specific matter yet. So if you can leave that up, Andy.
Sure.
I'll go ahead and see what Kathy has to say, and then Glenn.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Bernald. Yeah, this is Kathy. I had talked to city staff about the budget prior to us all being being affected by the COVID and our meetings being and not being able to meet. So we had actually, the city manager had budgeted the $35,812 for Santa Clara, and just before I came on the call today, I confirmed it with her. But now I see how the numbers are adjusting as a result of cities may possibly not being able to participate, and so we have budgeted the $35,812, but I don't know what would happen with $47,464 if I need to go back and get approval. Obviously we can talk about it, but I don't have anybody's authorization on that number right now. But our city wants to participate. Santa Clara does want to participate, and this is an important issue for our communities. And but I would just need to get an okay on that adjusted amount.
Do you have anything else you want to mention, Kathy?
No, that's all I have. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Glenn.
Yeah, hello, thank you. I think we're really talking about two separate questions right here. One is the budget of what we'd like to be able to spend. And the second question is what we're expecting in terms of income to go ahead and support that. And, I'm kind of with Santa Clara here. I'm not going to necessarily just be able to agree overhand. Our intention was we were going to pay the number before, and our original number, Sunnyvale is the largest contributor here. We would have been at 17%. And just with Andy's math, I go to 25%. And so could we separate the questions out? And also, I'm not sure, I think we'd want to take in writing that cities or jurisdictions are or are not going to be paying the money in. So would it be possible to look at this budget of here, this is what we expect, assuming this kind of revenue, this is what it would look like and how we would go ahead and do it. And then deal with over the time if, jurisdictions come back and say they can't pay or they're not going to participate. I just think we're confusing two separate questions. So that's my thought.
Thank you, Glenn. I think you've brought up a really good point, or several.
Is there anybody else that is left to speak? I can't see that now that I'm sharing the screen. Okay, I was going to suggest that there are a couple things we could do. We could.
Andy Liang wants to speak.
Okay.
Oh, hello. Hi. I'm just wondering whether we can consider another way of looking at the budget. If some cities are dropping out, can we keep the cash amount, the contribution amount for the rest of the cities so that we don't have to go back and adjust the budget? Then
Glenn, that's
we,
pretty much what you said, right? You can nod your head for one.
yeah. And
Well-
then we just look at how much maybe we will have 80% of the prior budget. Then let's look at how we can cut the service we need from ESA to meet that 80% budget. That may be easier.
Thank you. Andy, it does sound to me that this is something that we can't necessarily solve today. I think Glenn has brought up a good point that until we have firm confirmation from our cities and counties, that it's a difficult place to be in for making a final decision.
So are you giving me direction to create a different budget as well? One that just subtracts the money of the Santa Cruz communities out?
That may be preliminary. That may be jumping ahead of where we need to be.
Okay.
I'm thinking we need to get definite word from, as I said, the cities and counties. Then I also need to, in addition to that, as it fluctuates, we need to look at what services, how many meetings, what services we can provide, how many meetings a year we could go to. Can we go to 4 meetings a year? And as the items such as the SST comes up or legislation, should it bounce out of everything pandemic, that we be able to look at that so that we can still meet the needs of our regional base.
So we'll table this and then I guess we'll bring it up. We have a meeting in June.
Cynthia, I see your hand up, then I see Glenn's hand up.
I think we can give you our answers pretty quickly.
Well, I think you, yeah.
In
Santa
writing.
Cruz County, yes. I'm sorry.
So are we.
Glenn? Oh, Cynthia, anything more? Yeah. Okay. Glenn?
Yeah, I was, we still haven't heard from the public, but what I was maybe hoping we could do is approve this revenue sourcing and that this money coming in means we would be able to do X, which is what's been laid out. With the caveat that says, if we do not get this, if certain jurisdictions are able to not pay the full amount or need to drop out, that we will then have to have a subsequent meeting where we either go ahead and are able to see if cities or jurisdictions can pay additional, or we will have to go ahead and reduce our workload to go ahead and match that. Because I think Andy just brought up a point. We don't have a meeting scheduled in June. And if we don't approve the budget today or in a meeting we don't have scheduled, then we can't get into July, right? So that's a problem. So I'm wondering, once we hear from the public, if there's a way to approve this revenue source from jurisdictions that maps out to a certain workload. And then if revenue doesn't meet those, then we will either have to seek additional funding or reduce the amount of output that we're going to go ahead and do.
Anyone else want to weigh in? I've gone from panelists to attendees. I see no one else with their hands raised. Let me go to the full screen.
Would you like me to stop share?
Please stop share, yeah.
And I see Mr. Holbrook has raised his hand.
Okay. Is there any further discussion before I move to public hearing from the panelists? Steve Preminger.
Well, I was going to largely agree with what Glenn said. I think the reality of this uncertainty is something that has to be our top priority to figure out. And I think we need to see how many communities are out, including on this side of the hill, just to understand the reality of it. And based on that, have a special meeting as soon as possible in June to get together and move forward. I think, again, as Glenn said, we really need to focus and prioritize the work plan, because with this amount of revenue being reduced or shedded from the budget, it's going to change the scope of what we're able to take on. So I would withdraw my original motion to approve the budget. I think we need to do a lot of homework before we come forward with something that's realistic.
Thank you. Okay, Evan, I don't see anyone else waving at me. Oh, Lydia, sorry, I do now.
I'm sorry. Since we're gonna, I just wanted to say that on the content for this item, under the scope of work for the facilitator consultant services included, if you might consider task number 6 to develop an advocacy plan to be replaced with provide support for the work and strategic plan. Since we have those 2 plans available, perhaps it would be time to focus on the strategic and work plan and get support for that. So if you could consider that while we are, while we go to a public.
I think those are probably changes that we could make with the consultant rather easily.
Okay, thank you.
And we do have an item on the agenda this afternoon that is going to prioritizing the work plan. So we can keep that in thought too. Thank you, Lydia. I don't see any more hands waving. So Evan, if you could key up the people that we have that want to speak from the public, that would be great.
Yeah, so right now I see 3 raised hands in the attendees column. 1 from Robert Holbrook, 1 from Jennifer Landisman, and 1 from Jennifer Tassif.
Okay, Robert Holbrook, since you mentioned him first.
Thank you. This budget discussion is really a pairing of spending that we'd like to do with the resources that we're going to have available to do. And we've had a lot of discussion just now on the resources, the contributions from the communities, and that's obviously up in the air. But the spending side is something that needs to be discussed too. There were obvious issues flagged in the memo in the report, even absent the coronavirus pandemic. And I think it's important that that these be worked and presented, and solutions or some approach be presented to the roundtable for its consideration before wrapping up this whole question. And so I would suggest that that you consider extending ESA's contract by either 1 month or 3 months to give the roundtable 1 or 2 more meetings to hear back the report that ties up these spending issues, let alone the revenue issues, and give you a better basis for considering how we might want to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. If I'm correct, Andy, we are good until June 30th with the budget we have in place. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Next up, Jennifer Landisman.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much to all, and I hope everybody's been doing well. Thanks for this discussion. I would like to request, I think it's really important, first of all, to put in perspective how much was accomplished with the select committee, which had no budget. And a lot of that work has already been done, so there can be things built to that. But I think it's really important to know how much cities have invested in the past and are currently investing now. Let's say Palo Alto, I have an idea. Then there's Sunnyvale, for example. I noticed that you just hired Casper for noise monitoring for everything. I think it's really important for the public to know what amounts have been spent by municipalities and for the FAA as well. Number 2, I ask that all cities let their cities know and their constituents know if you are doing these sort of not going to have any staff devoted to airplane noise anymore because we're going to invest everything on the roundtable. That's a really important piece of information that needs to get out. Lastly, I just want to propose that there are models, and one was recommended by FAA, which is these voluntary agreements, which are put together with airports and airlines, various stakeholders. So it's a shared responsibility, as the FAA administrator mentioned in one of his letters. And I think we really have to look at it from a very big picture point of view as well, instead of us trying to negotiate what we can afford and then what are we going to buy with that. Thank you.
Okay. Normally, we don't necessarily answer the questions, but I think it's important that I do tell you that for the select committee, the county paid for everything. They didn't have a budget. Joe was always saying no budget, no, no's, but that's where it was paid for. And as to your third item, the FAA models with airports and airlines, we have been trying to get the airports on board, and they have not so far to date chosen to do that. So we are continuing and always hopeful, but yes, it's a consideration that we need to continue to look at. The next one, Jennifer T.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. A couple of things I wanted to bring up, and I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but ESA had estimated 7,000 per meeting, and we're spending 21,400 per meeting. That's 3 times the estimated amount. If we estimate we have 17 meetings, 6 regular meetings and 11 committee meetings, that's $364,000 per year. We're budgeted $250,000. We need to look at how this money is being spent. And I understand we just started. There were things that had to be set up, but we really need to look at how we're spending the money, as Liang had kind of mentioned. First, the emails. I thought that was great that that was brought up, how they can be dealt with more efficiently so we're not spending a lot of money. And we need to use ESA, their technical expertise. Perhaps also we need to set some sort of monetary meeting cap so that we're controlling expenses. The other thing that was not clear is how these meeting costs are going so high. I understand the emails, but are there travel and hotel expenses that we need to look at? I know that ESA runs consulting for the Los Angeles Roundtable, and I'm wondering how much each meeting costs there, and if Steve has any recommendations on how we can limit our costs on our side, kind of like Los Angeles might be limiting their costs. Again, we need to work within a budget. And the other question that I had is, do the committee meetings need to have the roundtable consultant? That's the other thing. I'd rather not limit the number of meetings and try to figure out ways that we can still have the meetings, perhaps even the committee meetings, perhaps with someone who's a little bit less expensive than the roundtable consultant, or maybe have them come in part of the meeting virtual, so we can keep down expenses. Just some thoughts there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer T. All right, is there anyone else that's come up, Evan?
No.
Okay, then I'm going to close the public comment period. We can remove the clock, please. Good, okay. Yay, it worked. Let me get back here now to try and see where you all want, if you want to say anything more. Give me a moment. I don't see any hands raised here. Anybody waving at me in your pictures? Glenn and Steve.
Yeah, so I guess the question I'm really trying to, I guess there's a couple different ways we could go here. What do you need from us today? What's the minimum, thing you need from us?
Andy?
I think you need to prove the dues or a revenue so that the cities can go back or at least respond to us and say that they can't participate. You can make a decision of if you want to cap it to what you're paying this year, and then that would change how we can budget it for next year then, after we find out who can belong, who is going to continue or not.
So did I hear you say what we could do is approve the due schedule as it's defined, and then based on new information that would be available at our next meeting, we could decide, if we find out jurisdictions are not going to join, that we either need to, lower our expectation of total amount of revenue that we're going to have for the fiscal year, or we could go ahead and change the dues schedule.
Right. And you could cap it at what you're currently paying, because that appears to, I also heard you say that you were comfortable with what you're paying now, but not more. So I would cap it at what the current due structure is, because we're on a formula right now. The bylaws say that we have a formula based on 50 cents to 10 cents. And then you can set what the total budget is.
So if I was going to make the motion of what I'm saying, I wouldn't add the cap, because that's kind of predefining how we're going to deal with things. Because, the change for us, I think, is, what if we just did what your math was like another $8,000 or something. And I'm not going to sit here and say the city of Sunnyvale is rolling in cash and doesn't have all the same problems that everybody else has. But I will tell you that in a $450 million budget, an $8,000 line item is not going to change. And, our budget, yes or no. So whether or not I could do that or not, I'd have to talk to other people. I'm just trying to get to, how do we get past where we are today? And hypothetically, if we just approve the due schedule as defined, and there could be a subpart of the motion that says here, as we find out more information, we'll have to adjust our budget, or potentially the due schedule, the due schedule or the budget as we go forward. So, okay, thanks.
Steve.
And I guess I would try to refine that a little bit more. A quick calculation has me think that without our Santa Cruz partners, we lose about a quarter of our budget. So I would be comfortable making another motion that asks that we approve the budget and have an addendum that says the budget could be off 25% for the reasons that people said, that there may be some cities in the county of Santa Cruz that have to drop out, or maybe they can come at a lower level, whatever it takes, but that we do try to get that authorization. I think I'm obviously maybe the one person here who has no right to say this, but I'm not, because I'm not an elected official. But I think the round table is important, that we represent the needs of the larger communities of Santa Cruz and Santa Clara County. So I'm comfortable having those discussions with supervisors, just so we can keep this momentum going, because I'm afraid if we don't, we're going to be fractured and lose whatever momentum we have.
Steve, are you ready to make a motion? So
yeah, I would make that motion, and I would also ask, when is the soonest we could come back together again in June with report backs, realizing that people may need to go to their councils to raise this officially.
So for clarity, would you restate the motion, please?
Yeah, I move that we go ahead with the due structure as presented, but that there be an addendum that says that due to the impact of the coronavirus, some jurisdictions may be dropping out, and there may be a need, if we want to achieve the budget we had last year, for communities. We may be asking more of communities. Are they willing to do that? So based on that, based on what I'm saying, I'm trying to build in flexibility as we make the request, and again, get away from the notion of a cap that by definition takes away 25% of the budget that we felt we needed to deal with airplane noise.
Andy, are you comfortable that you have that captured?
I believe so. So you're looking just to approve the budget as presented with the addendum that due to COVID-19, some jurisdictions may not be able to participate. And therefore, the budget, do you want to say the budget will be revisited, or that the budgeted, and that some jurisdictions may be asked to contribute more? Is that what I heard?
I said both things. I think the budget would perhaps be revisited and we may ask jurisdictions to pay more. So not part of the motion is my comment that says Santa Clara County may be willing to pay more. I don't want that on the record.
Could you break that down into two motions so I can get a second on each if need be,
Sure.
please? So the first part of the motion is approve as presented with the addendum that there may be a drop off due to the pandemic. Is that correct?
Yes, that there may be less revenues coming in to sustain the current budget that was presented at this meeting.
Okay, do I have a second for that?
Second.
Anita has seconded. Okay, any further discussion?
I see Kathy has her hand
Oh,
raised.
good. Kathy?
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that. I just wanted to add, I appreciate Steve's motion and I support it, especially the fact of revisiting the budget, because I know for us, for instance, there's a lot of revenue that we don't anticipate seeing, for and maybe another 6 months down the road. And I would imagine that other cities are in the same position. And so until they get a better idea of what their budget is going to be for another 6 months, because of the revenue, the anticipated revenue, whether it's coming or not, they can't make decisions. So I like the idea of revisiting the budget, say in another 6 months, to see who may be able to participate that is not sure of that now, because several of people have said, a lot of work has gone into creating where we are right now, and I don't want to see us lose all the efforts and time and money that has been invested so far. So whatever we can do, I'm happy to support the motion. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is not about revisit at this point. The motion on the floor is to approve as presented with the addendum that there may
Due to the pandemic, there may be jurisdictions that are unable to participate.
Okay, that's the question I'm going to call right now. Then I'm going to ask for a second. I see you, Liang. I just want clarification here that I'll be calling that question and then asking for a second motion about the revisiting. Does that sound about right, Steve, since it's initially yours?
Yes.
Okay, good. Liang, you had a comment.
Yeah. So my understanding is we will try to approve the budget as is with amendment. But then I suppose all the cities' budget will be finalized by June, mid-June or late June. Then we would know whether the cities have budgeted the roundtable for the next year. So it sounds like we should and then by July, we would know exactly how much each city will still contribute, right? So it sounds like we need to revisit this in July, not in 6 months.
This will be part of the second motion that we will be making. So right now, yes, we will need to revisit, but right now we are just voting on the approval of the budget as presented with the recognition that due to the pandemic, there will be a drop off in revenues. I'm going to call the question. Anita, is that you agree that since you seconded that?
Yeah, I think you might want to say a likely drop off.
Okay.
Or that we project a drop off or something like that.
Likely, we can't even project at this point. So yeah. Okay, I'm going to call the question. Due to the situation we're in, I'm going to have to do a roll call vote. And what I'm doing is just going as I see you on my screen. So if you all are ready, Rowena Turner, you're muted.
Try your space bar.
Yes.
There you go. You're good. Yes. Okay. Glenn,
Yes.
Ed,
Ed, yes.
Carlos,
Yes.
Liang,
Yes.
Lydia,
Yes.
Steve Preminger,
Yes.
Anita Enander,
Yes.
Cynthia Matthews,
Yes.
Kathy Watanabe,
Yes.
and Lisa Matichek.
Yes.
Oh, you're on board. Great. And I'm a yes. So that passes unanimously. All right, now I need a second motion. I believe it's going to be the revisit topic. Steve, will you be making it or Steve Preminger?
Well, I expressed interest in it. Yeah, I mean, I think we need to take a look at all the different options that are out there, including the work plan. I mean, I think we need to have, if the budget, well, I'm sorry, I'm not shaping it as a motion. So Glenn, why don't you go ahead and make the motion?
Is that okay with you, Marilyn?
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, I didn't want to go out of turn. So I would just move that as at the next practical meeting, staff, Andy, come back with new information, information, update us on what our revenue is looking like and whether or not we need to address looking at reducing what we're trying to accomplish or coming back and looking at the fee schedule. So it's really, and maybe that's too specific, it's just as information is available, staff will come back at the first appropriate meeting and inform us with action for revenue and expenses.
Do I have Anita, are you a second or you want to discuss?
I'll second, but I'll ask Glenn about maybe refining it a little bit. So I guess I'd call it a second with a friendly amendment. That we ask that as soon as practicable after July 1, we agendize a discussion about adjustments to the budget and work plan to reflect any deficiencies in revenue compared to the approved budget.
If you're more comfortable with that language, that's fine.
Okay, then I'll make Anita the maker of the motion and Glenn, you the second.
Sure.
All right. Okay. Just a second, Liang, I'll get to you. I see you. Andy, is that clear for you?
Yes.
Okay. Liang, question.
Yeah, question. So does that include maybe a review of the prior year's budget to see how it's spent so we know where we might be able to reduce cost?
Does
that
Anita
include?
Anita, I didn't hear anything about a review of last year's budget.
No, I agendize to me in agendizing the possible adjustments to the budget, you're gonna always look at all the data available to you as to where you can make cuts. And if that means analyzing how you spent things previously and what you might not do compared to prior year, to me, that would potentially be all part of the discussion.
But if the staff does not prepare all that information for us, we can't really make that discussion.
Do
we then expect to have a report, a summarize of all the itemized spending from prior year?
If
I understand.
I'm sure we can do that.
Yeah, what I understand is they are in the consent agenda so far. So, okay, as long as we have information, that would be great.
I don't see this as being a consent item. I see this being very much a discussion item.
Absolutely.
Oh, no, what I meant, all the information is in consent items approved by the committee, all the spending that I learned. But then I think for next meeting, we need a summarize of all these budget approvals.
That will be there. Andy,
that's great.
yes.
Andy's already said that she will provide.
She
That's
has.
great.
Okay. So Andy, if you would read the question again, please, so we're all clear.
After July 1, agendize a discussion of the roundtable of budgets and work plan deficiencies because of changes in revenue. Did that capture it?
Yeah, that's pretty short and sweet.
Is that all right? Did I capture everything?
Not enough to suit the group.
Okay, Glenn, I see the thumbs up from Glenn. I see thumbs up from Ed. I'll call the vote. All those in favor, I will do a roll call. Get ready with your unmute buttons. Rowena,
Yes.
Glenn,
Yes.
Ed,
Yes.
Carlos,
Yes.
Liang, unmute please.
Yes.
Lydia,
Yes.
Steve Preminger,
Yes.
Anita,
Yes.
Cynthia,
Yes.
Kathy Watanabe,
Yes.
and Lisa Matichek.
Yes.
And I am voting yes too. It passes unanimously of those here today. Thank you. Andy, do we need any further discussion on this item?
Madam Chair?
I didn't see it. I'm sorry. I was asking Andy if we needed any further discussion. Okay, yes, Anita.
It's probably obvious, but I'll say it anyway for the record. I think it would behoove the rest of us who think we will likely be in to have a discussion between now and as soon as possible with our own budget folks to see what kind of headroom we might have if we need to pitch in some more money. So I would encourage people, if you haven't had that kind of discussion with your own budget folks yet, that you do so ASAP.
Okay, Steve Preminger.
And that was my point earlier. I think our budget is normally done at the end of June. Because of the COVID situation, the Board of Soups has pushed that off into August, just so we have a better sense of what our revenues will look like. So I would agree with Anita that we all ought to check as soon as possible. And hopefully Andy can help us with the folks that say they're out, so we have a much better ability to discuss with facts.
Andy, can you pull out then what you were doing with the budget and present that to the roundtable at some point through an email with what is working on the formula? Do we need a motion for that?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, I can just send that to you so you have it, but I'm sending an email I'll send an email to the city managers asking them in Santa Clara County. I think it's pretty clear, Santa Cruz, but I'll send Santa Clara County city managers an email and asking what their best guess is at the moment.
Real good. Thank you very much. We are way behind schedule. Normally Steve would have nudged me by now, but it's an important discussion and certainly will affect whatever else we have to say throughout the day and moving forward. I'm going to close item number 3 and move on to item number 4. It is the Legislative Committee recommendations on the SST noise certification. I want to thank Lisa. It's so strange not being able to see you, Lisa, but thank you and your committee for going to work, for going to bat at this, especially under the situation that we're in. And I'm going to turn this over to you to do a presentation. I hope you're able to speak now.
I am. So I've turned off the video in case that helps with my internet connection. I don't know what's happening with it today. So the Ledge Committee met on April 29th, and you'll see the recap of the meeting in the packet. And that's starting on page 17, packet page 17, that is. And the Ledge Committee discussed 3 items. We talked about the noise certification for supersonic airplanes. We briefly discussed the role of the Ledge Committee. And then we talked about prioritizing future agenda items. And today I'm only going to talk about the action we're proposing we take in response to the proposed rulemaking on noise certification for supersonic airplanes.
Thank you.
You will see in the packet on page 21, the draft letter. And we have received some input from the public that I want to acknowledge. Just briefly, when the Ledge Committee discussed this, we talked about a lot of different things that could potentially be included in our input to the FAA on this proposed ruling, or this proposed rule. And ultimately, we decided that we should really be focused to make just a few points that's directly responsive to the proposed rule. And maybe other things that we discussed, we find a different venue to communicate those and try to work with the FAA on them. So we really just focused on responding to the proposed rule. And the three things we said we wanted to do or include in the letter, the FAA should adhere to its long stated position requiring new supersonic airplanes to meet the same noise standards as subsonic planes, and that supersonic planes need to meet or exceed stage 5 requirements. There's really no need to create a new category. And that if some of the newer technology is used, the VNRS and the PLR, that the use of those would not be able to be circumvented, and that the noise that residents experience would not be greater. And this one I feel like we're going to have to revisit. We didn't want residents on the ground to be exposed to greater noise once the planes have reached the typical altitude where you really can't hear them anymore. So what we want to prevent is turning off the VNRS and the PLR and then having the noise dramatically increase for residents on the ground. Not quite sure we got the right wording on that one yet, so I'd like to talk about that. But I guess to begin with, just if there are any questions about the letter we drafted, it would be good to hear those. I also want to add that the Ledge Committee also discussed, it's great to provide this input, but really what we need to do is contact our congressional representatives and share with them, phone call, in person with their staff. Somehow we just need to emphasize what we're saying in this letter so they're aware of our position on this. And if they can help us, that would be great. So are there any questions on the letter that we drafted?
Hey, Lisa, it's Steve Alverson. Could I add one clarifying point?
Absolutely.
Evan, if you could scroll down to where it talks about the altitudes of 6,000 feet and 10,000 feet. When we talked about this in the committee, there was an interest on the committee's part and on the public's part to make sure that the certification measurements, which happen very close to the airport, are extended, if you will, out from the airport and over the communities that we certainly are concerned about and our constituents are in. And one of the ways to do that is that the noise certification levels go into the Aviation Environmental Design Tool, also known as the ADT, and then are used for noise modeling for your environmental assessments, master plans, those types of things. So in order to tie it to something that the FAA is very familiar with and uses on a regular basis, we added to this letter that the noise certification measurement process would take those noise levels out to an altitude of 10,000 feet above field elevation for departures and 6,000 feet above field elevation to the runway touchdown point rollout. And those 2 points, 10,000 feet and 6,000 feet, are essentially the limits in the model without doing some additional work. So we thought it would be best to tie these noise levels to those levels, and it would be very familiar to the FAA. It was a bit of a change since the legislative committee saw it, and I wanted to make sure the committee was aware of why that was in there, and also to explain it to our members of the public who are participating so they can understand where those 2 points came from. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. So I guess the concern I've heard, Steve, and maybe I have a question for you on this, is that could a resident who is 5 miles, 10 miles from the airport be exposed to the same level of noise that somebody 2 miles from the airport is exposed to, the way this is worded now?
The simple answer is yes. And it's, of course, all in the way in which the pilots operate the aircraft. So the one sort of guarantee that we have is if they are required to use this variable noise reduction system in their certifications, and we're asking them to make it a standard part of the operation, then the assumption would be that that would be in place and continue up to 10,000 feet on departure and from 6,000 feet down to the ground on arrival. Once the pilot departs the airport area and they're subject to air traffic control, they are changing throttle settings and flap settings as directed and as vectored as need to. So we have, I would say, sort of relatively little control within the airspace system to demand, if you will, anything more than what we've asked for here. Of course, we could ask whatever we want, but at least what we have here seems reasonably tied to numbers that are a part of the noise certification process and a part of developing the noise levels in the model. But definitely, Lisa, once the pilot is in the air traffic system and being directed to fly where they need to fly, throttle settings will change as needed to get them from point A to point B.
Okay, so I guess I do want to see if we can tweak this a little bit here, but I want to give other folks the opportunity to comment or questions from the roundtable members first. And I don't see any hands.
I don't see any hands either. I'm scrolling.
I don't see any either. There's one from Lydia.
Okay,
Lydia?
hi Lydia.
Hi. I would like to propose if we might be able to include a sentence in the second paragraph on the first page. And I'm looking at my own draft so it's page 21, and then second paragraph. Second sentence on the second line starts with, "This has been the FAA stated policy for several decades." And then it finishes at the fourth line, "At this time." If we might be able to add in a sentence after that line to say, "Furthermore, the proposed noise standards for supersonic do not meet the FAA goal stated in the FAA February 2018 rule that they would not certify supersonic planes or allow them to operate if they didn't meet the standards then applicable to subsonic planes."
So Lydia, you had your head down while Evan was attempting to type.
Okay.
And so he's modifying the letter on the fly here. So if you want to go through that again,
Can I?
And if it's easier, you can
Shall I
copy and
email
paste
it?
or email it to me and I can paste it in here if that's
Okay. So let me work on that while you take other comments then.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking more for, did anybody have any questions? And then I was going to open up to public input for their input and then come back with any modifications we might want to make to it.
Okay, then I will just type mine. Ignore me right now.
So are there any other questions from folks on the roundtable?
I'm seeing Glenn shake his head. Lisa, can you see people? If you're not in the video, you're seeing the committee, right?
I can't see everybody, but I can see some because I have it set up so I can see a lot of stuff. Because the fabulous setup I had went out the window when my internet connection dropped.
Yeah. Okay. I am seeing that I saw Darlene Yapley, but it appears her hand has come down.
Yeah,
I had a question for you, Lydia. Did you, as I proceed to call on these people, did you take into account the input that we got regarding any changes in the letter with what you were, Lydia, with what you were saying today? Lydia's off.
I'm sorry.
Is your amendment to this draft considering any of the input that we got from the community?
No. So I would say, why don't you go to the community first and see if this is something that we even want to put this together?
So I saw Darlene's hand up first. Then I have Jennifer Landisman, Jennifer Tassif, and then Rob Holbrook. And Andy, we have a 2-minute time clock up to go.
I will stop sharing this screen then.
Evan, do you have it or do you want me to do it?
I can do it. I'm going to stop sharing the letter right now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Okay, Darlene.
Thank you to the Legislative Committee for an excellent letter and meeting. I have 2 suggestions. Believe it or not, they were both mentioned just now. One is the letter clearly states the policy of the FAA, but I also think it's good to say that the FAA stated goal has not been met, because I think it's always powerful to use their own language in what they plan to do and they didn't do it. So I think it's what Lydia had mentioned in terms of the FAA's goal. The second point is building on what Lisa says, that I think there does need to be more rewording, because the new technology is a new threat. And the way the rules are written is that they are measuring the noise levels only at the airport or very close to the airport, and then will allow those levels to be anywhere, 10 miles, 20 miles, 40 miles under the flight path. We cannot allow these noise levels on the ground at the airport to become the standard for the noise on the entire flight path. And the difficulty with the AEDT is that it's been proven to only be good at measuring noise around the contour close to the airport. So I want to push back a little bit, Steve, that we might need to come up with other criteria than what is in the AEDT tool. As we all know, it hasn't detected our significant noise now. So I would encourage including the stated FAA's goal and not somehow wording this in a way that we're not going to be suffering from the new technology and not using the AEDT standard that really is not good outside of the airport. So if we can word it differently to protect ourselves, that's what I would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. Jennifer Landisman.
Hi. Hi, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So it's kind of along the lines of what Darlene mentioned. I just want to point out that under NEPA policy, where there's supposed to be a way to kind of have a degree of safety for people on the ground, FAA uses a threshold that is not consistent with that. They just kind of go into an area which is a very high level of noise and limited to a certain part of near the airport. So I would question the process of having new noise certification rules for something that's never been thought of for a NEPA situation, because there are basically no mitigation laws or rules or protections with the way FAA works now. And that's the challenge that we have been presenting to FAA, and that there is a law for them to look at alternative metrics. And they said, okay, we agree with them. So based on that, we really do have to have other criteria for NEPA. We have to have other metrics to kind of address all the issues that Darlene just mentioned, whether it's with the model, it's about policy. And right now, you know, they say stakeholders are talking about it, but it's really only industry. So we have the industry setting noise rules for us. And so that's missing in the letter, I think.
Is that all you wanted to say?
Yeah, but yeah, that, you know, we're not stakeholders in this, and we're kind of going along just answering to what they say. And we've known that this has worked very well for FAA in the past. And I would hope that we could do a little bit more, because otherwise it's just a free ride for whoever are the manufacturers and so forth. We pay it all. We pay the cost. They have the free.
All right, thank you. Jennifer T.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, first I wanted to thank the Legislative Committee for creating the letter. Thank Lisa, also kudos for creating this and taking the effort on this. A couple of comments. In the second paragraph, it states about stage 5 noise standards. And that has me a bit worried because technological advances mean it might be currently stage 5, but it can be moving to stage 6, stage 7. So I would reword this a bit and just simply say something to the effect of supersonic airplanes to meet or exceed the noise standards that exist at the time for newly manufactured subsonic aircraft currently and in the future. So meaning if it moves from stage 5 to stage 6 in the future, that SST need to meet stage 6 as well. I don't want to limit to stage 5 and in 20 years we've got a problem. Second thing is exactly what Darlene was saying about the VRNS, variable noise reduction systems, and the PLR systems, and the noise outside of the airport contour. I agree completely with her that we've got a problem potentially in this language, and that somehow we need to basically say that SST need to meet or exceed the subsonic flight standards. And I don't know if there are standards or not, but basically flights at high altitude, we can't have any more noise for an SST than for a subsonic flight. And I don't know how to word that. If we start putting altitudes and complexity in here, the FAA can skirt things. So we need to tell them exactly what we want. We want no more noise on an SST than on a subsonic flight for newly manufactured planes. And right now, we're kind of a little bit in control, and that SST has not been approved yet. And so we need to make sure that we ask directly what we want. Putting altitudes and stuff in there is a little bit dangerous. We could end up in a bad position, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Holbrook.
Thank you, and thanks to the Ledge Committee and Mayor Matichak for her work on this. Yesterday, I sent you all a letter with 2 specific suggestions for the response we're discussing. The first would help to prove to the FAA that their own goal for 40 years has been for future supersonic airplanes to meet the noise criteria required of subsonic airplanes. It's important to remind the FAA of 3 specific statements they've made, since they're now proposing to abandon that goal, and those are in my letter. My second point could actually be more important for many people, and it's one that's been made here. We could be looking at a brand new policy for noise, which is hiding behind a new technical feature that's being introduced for the first time. The FAA is proposing that whatever noise a resident living 3 miles or so from an airport experiences becomes the standard for any resident anywhere. This is coming up now because it's the first time the FAA wants to allow the use of this new noise reduction technology. And we expect residents that are further from an airport to have less noise than residents close to the airport. But with these new systems, that might not be true anymore. So we need to push back hard on this. I'll try and explain this in a minute with what time I have available, but what I want to say is that I think the technical wording of the paragraph doesn't serve us. In fact, it may be counterproductive. It's hard to get this right. I suggest that rather than work on it with the limited time we have now, that you provide the legislative committee and the chair with authority for the letter to be reworded outside of this meeting and sent by the deadline of July 13th of this year. I guess I can't explain it. I'd be happy to if somebody were to call on me with their time. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I don't see any other hands. Evan, have you seen any indication of anyone else who wants to speak from the public?
No, I have not.
Okay, thank you. Then we can take the clock down and close the public comment period. Hello, everybody. I'm coming back on. There we go. All right. Is there any discussion from committee Steve Preminger? That's it. I also would like to have some response from Steve Alverson on because he is our technical expert as to the amendments that are going, but I will ask Steve Preminger first to comment.
In early March, I had the pleasure of going to an airplane noise convention with some roundtable members, but more importantly, a number of the people who just spoke. I found them to be eloquent partners and very concerned about this. And from what I could tell, willing to put up their own money to make sure that their points of view were represented. And I really valued that. And I appreciated the discussion we just had. I wanted to make sure, though, that the letter was vetted or shown. Steve's input was considered in the letter. I'm not an expert at this, and his help on everything we've been doing is really important. So in addition to the public input, I agree with you, Mary Lynn, that I think that's going to be an important point to learn.
Thank you. Steve Alverson, I'm going to look to you now for any response to what we've heard from the public and from our committee members as to the best way to proceed with this.
You bet, Marilyn. Thank you. And thanks for everyone's input. Sort of on the last point first that Robert Holbrook mentioned, while the direction could be to refer this back to the legislative committee to revise it, it would need to come back to the full roundtable for approval before it's sent out by the legislative committee based on the way that our current work plan is written up. And not that that's an impossibility between now and the July 13th deadline, but just wanted to point that out. I think all the points that were raised are really well taken. And I agree that this is a unique situation where it may be the first time where aircraft make more noise after they've left the airport area due to these variable noise reduction systems than closer into the airport. The question is, how do we structure the letter to make sure that there's some teeth in it that the FAA can grab onto? The 6,000 and 10,000 foot was an attempt at that. That could certainly be changed to something like one of the public commenters said these levels would need to be maintained for some distance away from the airport. It could be in miles, it could be in altitude, but the direction would need to be clear in that the variable noise reduction system could not be turned off until the aircraft reached a certain distance. All of that keeping in mind that when the aircraft is being flown in the airspace, the pilots will do what they need to do in order to maintain the safe operation of the plane, which could entail changing the settings on the airplane. I'm open to certainly some of the amendments that I've heard. I've certainly read the Darlene's and Robert Holbrook's letters that came in yesterday to emphasize the historical nature of that, and certainly would be open to adding that as well. Given where we are in terms of the time of the meeting, we could spend the rest of the meeting sort of rewriting it in place or perhaps refer it back to legislative committee and then have it come back. And certainly it would, I can see Lisa she has her hand up. And also we definitely want to hear from Lisa what she would like to do since she's the committee chair.
Thanks. If I could, I appreciate all of the comments and the input we've gotten. And maybe if I can suggest a path forward, which is I can do a quick summary of the input we've received and how that would modify the letter. And given the deadline, I'm a little bit concerned about this having to come back to the roundtable. I believe our documents, the bylaws and the MOU and the work plan and all those things say that the full roundtable has to approve the action. And so I kind of like, for me, the action is approve sending the letter and contacting our congressional representatives. And I would say I'm happy to work with Steve on making the modifications, run it by the chair of the roundtable, just to make sure we've captured everything and then send it in. And if I'm going to take a crack at summarizing what I've heard. In the paragraph that starts with first, I think we want to add the point that ending position, and there are additional citations that we can include to sort of support that point. And those came from Mr. Holbrook, that the supersonic planes need to keep in step with the changes to the requirements of subsonic planes, to Jennifer T's point. And Lydia, is there a way to summarize what you were saying? Like, can you say what the gist of that was rather than the exact wording?
I can actually pull it up on the screen. Lydia sent me the exact text, if that's helpful.
Sure, but Lydia, could you also just say briefly what the point is of it?
Basically, the point is not allowing standard to be for the entire flight path. So that once it's not for the, I don't want them to just have a standard over there.
Can you specifically tell us where you're putting that?
It's up on the screen right now.
No, I mean within that paragraph.
So I think Evan pulled up the original letter and inserted the wording that Lydia sent in the first paragraph, or in the paragraph that starts with first. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question. I don't know exactly how we do this within Zoom, but I'm wondering if we can, if you all have an ability to talk among yourselves while we're continuing with the meeting, at least in terms of typing changes, and we come back to this towards the end. Is that a possibility that you can see? I don't know.
That is possible, but it may be a little bit difficult to set up at this point. We could do it through a breakout room. I can look into that now and see if we can incorporate that.
Lisa, how do you feel about that?
You know, I think we can, you know, I'm not sure who you meant to go off and talk about this.
Well, I meant you and Lydia, I feel, have captured what the community has said, I hope. And I'm wondering if the two of you can hammer it out just for a time efficient thing of where you can take the conversation, then come back with us late, in a little bit later in the meeting. That may not work, and maybe I'm just taking up time I shouldn't be. I'm trying to figure out.
If we can just power through this, I think it'd be good. So
good. Okay,
Lydia was adding that we already talked about the stated goal, that yeah, to me, this is yet another point supporting the stated position of the FAA that supersonic would have to meet the same requirements as subsonic. So I'm happy to include, maybe slightly reworded, something like this in this section, because it's yet another data point. So that's that takes care of the paragraph that starts with first. In terms of the second, and I feel like we struggled with the wording, and I appreciate folks recognizing that this is difficult to succinctly describe what we're looking for. From what, we have the language from Mr. Holbrook, and I think what we want to do is say that if the VNRS and or the PLR are used during the certification process, that they can't disable those systems after the certification is granted, and that, and these are my words, and I'm not the technical expert here, we want the noise that the plane generates independent, like if it was measured on the plane and where it's making the noise, to not increase and not be heard by people, the increase not be heard by people on the ground, no matter how far it is from the airport or what altitude it's at. So we just want to make sure that the plane itself doesn't make more noise than what it was certified for during takeoff. Now, maybe Steve can comment on, is there a way to word that? Is that what you heard folks say?
Yeah, Lisa, I did hear that. And I think the text we have there is close. I'm wondering if it's a matter of adding a distance to that text. And I'm thinking of it, so the second paragraph where it states, further we request the VRNS and or the PLR system be required to be used until the airplane reaches. And then at that point, we could potentially put in a distance from the airport or something along those lines, so that we're accomplishing exactly what's been asked for by the public.
So maybe, Steve, you could help educate us a bit on if it's a subsonic plane, does noise increase after the point where the noise certification measurement is taken, or does it decrease, or is this a problem with subsonic as well as supersonic?
Yes, there is no limitation on subsonic aircraft in terms of their engine settings and the way the aircraft is operated. Once it gets into the main airspace system, the idea of noise certification is to create an aircraft on landing and arrival and a group of aircraft that it meets a certain category of quiet based on the number of engines, based on the weight of the aircraft, and every subsequent aircraft after that meets that same limit. But in terms of practical operations, and I think maybe Jennifer G mentioned it, there are no subsonic standards for aircraft beyond the noise certification standards. Once they leave the airport and they're doing what they're doing, they're doing that. So we don't have anything to hang our hat on to say that we want it to happen the same way with subsonic aircraft, because there's no, other than the noise certification process, no process at which the FAA holds aircraft to certain noise levels once they've departed the airport area.
Okay, so I was trying to figure out how to modify this paragraph. And is there an issue saying that, I'm not sure I can tweak this paragraph, but is it reasonable to say what I said earlier? The plane cannot make any more noise than what it made at the point it was certified until it reaches maybe an altitude of 15,000 feet. So that would mean, and I don't know how 15,000 feet. But, uh-oh, it says my internet connection is unstable. Am I still?
No, we can hear you.
Okay, phew. You know, is there a way of saying, not necessarily the noise measured on the ground, but the noise the plane makes?
Yeah, and unfortunately, they don't take noise measurements on the planes. In terms of noise certification, those measurements are taken on the ground. And there are specific ways the throttles need to be set, the way the aircraft weighs, the way it's operated. They do it to a standard day temperature. But unfortunately, there's no sort of microphones on the aircraft to say what the noise level is as it's making it during noise certification. That doesn't mean we can't ask for it, but it would be a certainly different approach to this. And I'm just wondering, you know, one of the committee asked to keep it as simple as possible. I'm just wondering if something along the lines of that the airplane heard, noise from the airplanes heard by residents on the ground is no greater than the certified noise level measured at the same locations, the noise certification process, and then up to some altitude or some distance away from the airport.
I guess
that's the way it was written initially. I think it said up to 15,000 feet.
Yeah, so I think the concern that I've heard from our residents is that might mean that people who live 10 miles away, who currently do not experience as much noise as residents who are closer to the airport, might now hear an increase in noise.
Correct.
And I'm not sure that's fair or what we would want.
Right. Well, hopefully on departure, you know, the aircraft is climbing and getting higher. As it leaves the area on arrival, of course, it's further out, it's higher as well, but that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be hold downs due to air traffic situations or requirements to speed up or slow down or configure the aircraft in a way that would make it noisier, which we certainly have seen over the Monterey area.
So did you have a chance to read the suggested wording from Mr. Holbrook?
I did.
And I'm wondering about your reaction to that. Is that something we could work with or just use? Or what would be the issues with that wording?
I'm going back to it right now.
Because as Steve Preminger pointed out, we have a lot of very engaged residents who have spent a lot of time learning about this.
Yeah, and pardon while I'm rereading this again.
Do you want me to go to comments from other
Yeah, I believe what we're seeing here, there's not specifically a read-write of the language, but it says whatever level of takeoff noise of residents under the flight path at a reference point 2 miles to 3 miles exposed to defines acceptable noise levels. To be clear, we're talking about down energy. Yeah, okay. I see the alternative language here. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Do you think it accomplishes what we want to accomplish?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, certainly to a height of 15,000 feet.
So maybe Evan, can you pull that language into the letter in place of starting with further?
Okay. Yes, it might take a second to get through.
Sure.
juggling a few things right now.
Sure. So while Evan's doing that, should we go to comments from Roundtable members? Mary Lynn?
Can I ask a quick question of Steve?
Sure.
Steve, is Class A still at 16,000?
That's a good question.
Does it make sense potentially to use Class A specification here?
Yeah, let me check quickly.
And then while Steve's doing that, Glenn?
Okay, thank you. So I have some comments here, and there's going to go a little bit around the board, and I have no specific language changes to make in the letter, but I have comments to make. First off, what we're showing right now is why things are so expensive and why it costs so much for this committee to operate. I believe it is an issue that the full committee is going to need to approve the text that goes in this letter. We should just be giving, once we've, got the general concept here, we should be giving that authority to the chair of the committee to go ahead and work out. And the fact we have to come back to this committee or approve all the specific text right now is an issue. I think we are trying to put too many specifics into this letter. And specifically, we're talking about trying to put in this noise monitoring measurements about stuff that the FAA doesn't do today. We're expanding the scope of what we're trying to address here. We talked about this in the committee, that we should be very concise and very specific about what we're trying to do. I'm not disagreeing that all these points aren't valid. I'm not sure that this is the right forum to go ahead and get that information across. I'm very concerned by the fact that the FAA, I think, is on the call, and they're hearing the whole discussion of what was going on with this right here. But the way the process works, they don't take that into account. It's all about what we are able to put into the letter. And so I think that's a separate process kind of issue with this. I think we're missing also where our real advocacy needs to be, which is with our congressional representatives, and how we're going to be able to go ahead and get our passionate issue about all of this into directly the ears of our congressional leaders, so that they can make decisions about this and how it gets through their staff and to those people. And as we're trying to get all these very specific issues and points into this letter about why the FAA should not be letting more noise come out of a supersonic aircraft when it takes off and lands, we should not forget the fact it was Congress that told the FAA to do this. So we're trying to get all these specific points in here, and it's Congress is the one who asked them to do this. So we can get this information to the FAA, but again, we need to get to our congressional reps, so they're the ones asking the FAA about this, not just another letter from a round table. So I think the short answer here is I think we're trying to put too much information in this letter and too many specifics, and we're trying to nitpick, and we should give the authority to the chair to go ahead and be able to address this. And maybe we'd find a way to use our time more effectively and be able to have things not cost as much. Sorry for my rant.
Thanks, Glenn. Anita?
Sorry, I had my hand raised for the earlier comment. I agree with what Glenn just said, that we've got to find a way to let the chair of the roundtable, the chair of the committee, go off and approve this and get it done. I don't understand in terms of our operating procedures why we have to do this, refine this when we've agreed on the concept. We certainly delegate this all the time in operations within our city.
If I may, I would like to have Shantine speak to the legal aspects, and I'm sorry, my dog is barking. Shantine, if you're available to speak to how we review this and act as a roundtable, as a voting for a whole. I'll be right back.
Sure, absolutely. And this kind of segues a little bit into what I'll talk about in the next section, but speaking specifically about this issue, the roundtable is the parent body, and there's no directives or laws regarding how the roundtable wants to manage its standing committees. It's really up to the roundtable to determine whether or not they would permit the standing committee to have the authority to do something like draft the letter and then issue the letter without, full roundtable review. So that's something that can be done. When I'm looking at the bylaws, and I've looked at the bylaws as well as the work plans, there's no specifications in there with respect to how this currently has to be done. The delegation of authority applies to the standing committee in pretty broad sense, and that's normal. So if the standing committee at this point wants to have that authority so that they can do something like draft a letter, issue it, and call that within their authority, that can be done. I would recommend that it goes to the roundtable for such a discussion, and then the roundtable can say that this is how we are interpreting that particular clause. Otherwise, the particular clauses that I've looked at don't speak specifically to how that action should be managed. So if it's the will of the majority here and that's how it wants to be handled, there's nothing restricting the standing committee from having that authority going forward.
So what Glenn has suggested that we do is within our authority as a roundtable at this point. We could in fact delegate to the chair of the committee as representative of the committee and the chair of the roundtable to go off and finalize the text.
Yeah, but I would say that with a broad, for this issue, yes, if you want to have a broader discussion about what the standing committees, okay, I see you shaking your head, Anita.
I'm not talking about general speaking, I'm talking about this incident case for right now.
Yeah, I mean, that would be something that they could do if that falls under the agenda. I think that falls within what's been agendized at this point. And it would be up for the roundtable to take an action like that right now.
So then my question to the committee would be, do you want to keep slogging through this? Or Lisa, do you and the rest of the committee members, would you like to have a motion to authorize Lisa and Mary Lynn to go finalize this with Steve's advice?
So as long as everyone is comfortable with the items I've summarized as either being included or tweaked, then I'm very comfortable working with Steve and Mary Lynn. And to me, the action that the roundtable would be approving is for us to finalize this, to send it, and to also, to Glenn's point, as I said earlier, also for us to contact our congressional representatives, meet with them, talk with them about this, because they need to know our concerns and help us address this issue.
Okay. If I'm getting all kinds of hand raising. Ed, and then Liang, and then Steve Preminger.
Yeah, thank you. I know we're way behind, so I'll be quick. First of all, I want to agree with Glenn. I sat on this committee. The committee was very productive. We took public input. We came up with a document. I think that it's great that we should do things like this, come back. If anything, what we would do is I could see where it could come back on a consent agenda to just be adopted at the next meeting, something like that. We don't necessarily have to, I know Anita's shaking her head because she's afraid that item is going to get pulled on the consent agenda. But I was listening to what Shantine was offering. I think we have enough legal grounds to guide ourselves in our own direction. And to Glenn's main point is that's why a lot of these meetings, we get 2 hours into them and we're on item number 2 or 3 and we have 8 items. So something like this will really help us get back on mainstream. I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Shantine, I see you raised your hand.
Briefly, I just wanted to remind that while I agree, it's my legal advice that you can delegate those authorities when it's agendized properly. I would just make sure that they're restricted relatively to the topic at issue, and that we don't, unless we set an agenda item going forward where it's a fuller discussion about the delegation of authorities to the respective standing committees, that any such delegation, for example, with respect to this letter, is really kept to what the issue is on the table. So it's just a reminder of that. I think you're all aware of those restrictions.
Thank you. I should mention that Michelle Wu has joined us. I do not see a raised hand. Anita.
So Madam Chair, if you would please, I'll make a motion that for this instant case of the agendized item of this letter, that we authorize the chair of the legislative committee, the chair of the roundtable, to work together to incorporate the clarifications and additions enumerated by the chair of the legislative committee, finalize the letter, and have the chair sign it and distribute it as discussed.
Did you mean to include Steve?
Yes, I would expect you to, to consult with staff as appropriate.
Do I have a second? It looks like Steve Preminger is raising his hand. That's a second. You can nod.
Yes,
Yes.
I wanted to second.
Any further discussion?
So I would like to see if Anita would have a friendly amendment, and that would be that we would also include in that motion that we would reach out to our congressional representatives about this.
As long as that is appropriate within the agendized item, then yes. So
Thank
if
you.
Shantine wants to weigh in and say, no, 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 this is her chance to say, no, no, no. Otherwise, I would say yes, because I believe it was intended that copies of this would go to our congressional representatives anyway, so it would be
Okay.
appropriate to discuss it.
Andy, do you have the motion? Would you read it back, please?
I don't have it. Evan, do you have it?
Yeah, so Anita made the motion to authorize the chair of the roundtable and the chair of the legislative committee to finalize this letter along with Steve's help in finalizing the letter to send it off.
Okay, I don't know who 408-821, what 408-218-7125 is. The hand is raised.
That's me. I think
Okay,
I
Lee.
erased. I lost my internet connection. That's why I
Okay.
connected. But
Okay,
Anita did what I was trying to do. So
Good, thank you. Okay, we have a motion. We have a second. Motion by Anita, second by Steve Preminger. I will call roll. Rowena Turner. Yep, ready, guys. Unmute, please.
Yes.
Glenn Hendricks.
Yes.
Lydia Kale.
This is Anita.
Whoops, I'm sorry. Anita, I called on Lydia for a vote.
Yes.
I'm sorry, who's this?
Steve Preminger.
Yes.
Sarah, I'm on a.
Okay, Anita, Carlos.
Sorry. Yes.
Okay, we got Anita out of order. She's a yes. Carlos.
Yes.
Ed Boderoff.
Yes.
Liang.
yes.
We got Anita. Michelle.
Yes.
And Kathy.
Yes.
Lisa.
Yes.
Okay, and Liang, you're appearing twice, and I'm a yes. Thank you very much.
And just to note, Cynthia had to drop off a little bit early.
Thank you, Evan. All right, I'll look forward to the material. Now I have to find my agenda again. It looks like it's with the time, Steve, is there anything you would recommend or Andy you would recommend? Because I need to verify we do have a hard stop at 4. Steve, you're muted.
Yeah. Gotta get used to that. The next topic was quite a bit on this subject that we just covered. In short, it's sort of what is the authority of the standing committees? What do they have to bring back to the full roundtable? Shantine provided some point of clarification regarding this specific issue. And the broader issue is, do we need to set up more of a process for this to occur than we have now? Right now, in terms of my reading, it's fairly clear what the work plan says and how it should work. But we certainly got the sense and took the pulse of the roundtable that they want a little bit more flexibility, more freedom. And so that was the idea of this next item. if in fact the only legislative committee meeting we expect to occur before our next committee meeting is the one that's just been authorized, we could certainly table this to a future meeting and cover it then, so that we can recoup some of our time. But since I'm sharing this item with Shantine, I also would turn the floor over to you, Shantine, and see if there's anything that you wanted to add to this item.
Thanks so much, Steve. I am, quite literally at the mercy of the roundtable. So it's really up to you all if this is something that we want to table for now. I think that we kind of hit the nail on the head with the prior discussion with respect to some ways of being flexible sort of on the spot and on the fly. If there's an issue that comes up with something that the standing committee has been working on or intends to do, and they feel that they need to bring that to the roundtable, if ultimately the roundtable determines that the delegation of authority they want to give with respect to whatever that item is includes the either the legislative or technical committees going off on their own and handling that, that is something that the roundtable absolutely can do. So I really leave it to you all for a larger discussion. It's not a particularly long one. I think you're all sophisticated enough to, you understand exactly what's going on here. But Steve, if you want to comment on it, I'm happy to go over it, and it will be fairly short, I think.
Shantine, as chair, I'd like you to go ahead and proceed.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chair. So obviously, when we're discussing standing committees in this particular context, we are talking about standing committees subject to the Brown Act. There are other types of standing committees that would not be so, but since the larger parent body, the roundtable, is subject to the Brown Act, the standing committees, which obviously consist of less than a quorum of the roundtable, are authorized by the bylaws and any other documents taken by formal action of the roundtable to do whatever delegated authority that they have. So standing committees are there to exercise that delegated authority. What that means is ultimately the roundtable is the body that determines what that authority is. And so if there are questions about the interpretation of certain clauses in either the bylaws or the work plans or the strategic plan, my recommendation is always to return to the roundtable for the roundtable to discuss what the intended interpretation is. For much of it, I think it is fairly clear. I think that the bylaws are, for me, about as thorough as I see them, which is they say that the standing committees essentially exist at the pleasure of the roundtable. But I do want to point out, because this is coming up today, that the roundtable really has the authority to define what that means and what those authorities are. And if the roundtable wanted to take a position such as anytime a legislative committee or technical committee wants to submit a letter, that can be done at the subcommittee meeting as opposed to at the roundtable committee meeting. The roundtable can make such a determination if they feel that that's appropriate. They could also do it on a line-by-line basis. So that's really the overarching point here. I am preparing a Brown Act primer for all of you to have, and I think it'll be fairly comprehensive and address maybe some of the fringe issues and also a lot of the more common issues with the Brown Act. So hopefully that'll be very helpful. But with respect to moving along meetings, if that comes up and you guys want to reserve the action or whatever it is to the standing committee, it is within your authority to make a motion and do that at that time, or agendize the issue for a larger discussion about what the standing committee authorities are, and there can be a deliberation at that point to really hammer down if there's any multiple reasonable interpretations about how one of the committees can act or what they require, or if there needs to be more process.
So in terms of should the chair of the technical or the legislative subcommittees decide that there is a piece of legislation that may, I'm trying to figure it out so it goes to both Anita and that they see have come across their screen and they want to pull their subcommittee together, can they do that without the approval of the chair by exception, or without the approval of the roundtable? Can they work on their own?
I would say that the strict wording of the bylaw currently says at the direction of the roundtable with respect to what should be considered or not. Again, that can be amended, but when I read, general principles of contract law, when we look at a clause, we look at what the context is. And the context for what I've read, at least in the work plans with respect to those committees, is that that should be at the direction of the roundtable. What that can mean is that you have a meeting with the roundtable and there's a question about whether or not they can address that at the next meeting. And that can simply be a matter of, I think can be handled fairly quickly amongst you all. And then you can delegate that authority back down to the legislative committee. But as I read it right now, and to err on the side of what the contract says, I think it says that it needs to be at the direction of the roundtable. As I said, though, if that's something that the roundtable no longer wants to have as part of their bylaws, if they would want to give the authority to the legislative committee to sort of sua sponte, so on their own, bring up an issue, that can also be part of an amendment to the work plan or to the bylaws that the entire roundtable considers and then takes action on.
So when the subcommittee met, the legislative subcommittee met, there was an item, I believe, that Lisa included, that adding potential legislation as it comes down the road. Sometimes that takes a short period of time. It has a short period of time in which to respond. If we as a roundtable said, go ahead, legislative subcommittee, we could do that and say, yes, explore these pieces of legislation. But once we've done that, does their response need to come back to the roundtable?
I would think yes. I mean, the way that I read it suggests that the recommendations must come back to the roundtable for review. The language I have here specifically is for review and action, yes, has to go back to the roundtable. So in my opinion, yes. But again, you could authorize greater flexibility if the roundtable so determined. I don't think that flexibility is currently in the bylaws as they stand, but that doesn't, or the work plan necessarily. But I think that the roundtable could certainly create that level of flexibility if they so chose down the line.
And given what's on the agenda today, is it something that we would look at today or look at in the future?
With respect to that particular legislation or the actions of the subcommittees?
The action of the subcommittee.
You could bring that up. Yeah, I think that's fair. What's been agendized is the process and structure, and I think that is fair with respect to making a determination at this point from the roundtable about what that process and structure would include. So I think that is absolutely fair game with respect to this.
Okay.
However,
yes, however, we have a time commitment.
Exactly.
It's not listed as an action item, so
exactly.
We couldn't, the roundtable can't take action on this item. You can certainly discuss it and have a concept, but it would need to be agendized as an action item.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Okay, Mary Lynn, can I add
Yes.
one other thing? 2 points that I made in the piece that was included in the agenda, sort of the discussion points. One is we had our budget discussion earlier. We need to keep in mind that all of these meetings drive the budget to some extent. And so there's a number of meetings that are currently in the scope of work. It would be good to operate within those number of meetings, whether they happen all at once or over some period of time, and keep those in mind. And the other is if the technical working group chair or the legislative committee chair would want to bring to the roundtable sort of 5 or 6 items and say, these are the items that we see our committees working on over the next 2 or 3 months, and we're going to have a meeting each month to discuss these, then the roundtable could authorize that work and they could go off and do what they want to do and then bring that back to the roundtable. Or as Glenn suggested, get the authorization from the roundtable in advance to take action on particular items if they want to move forward. So I think there's some ability to work within the current framework if the standing committee chairs want to bring sort of a slate of items to the roundtable for approval for their work plan.
Thank you, Steve, for the clarification. I think given the budgetary consequences as they are, that this is something that it probably should be front loaded, but I'd look to the group to talk to us. to speak to it. Anita and Lisa, I see both of your hands up. Anita?
Would you take Lisa's comments first, please?
Certainly. Lisa?
Thank you. So my take on this is that, we have the MOU and the bylaws. And then as a group, the entire roundtable, we created the strategic plan and the work plan. And in there, it's certainly more than what is captured in this maybe 1 or 2 pager on this draft for deliberative.
Lisa, you've dropped off.
Uh-oh.
You're back, kind of.
So in the work plan, it specifies what the 2 committees can work on. And so I don't understand why we would revisit that or have to get that approved by the roundtable. We've already approved that when we created the work plan. So my read on all of our documents are that the 2 committees have their work plans set out for them, and it's up to the chair of those committees to call meetings and work on the things that are specified in the work plan, and that the thing that has to come back to the roundtable is if we want to take an action on something, such as we did regarding the FAA's proposed rule, we come back to the full roundtable and they have the opportunity to weigh in on it. But I don't feel like we need to revisit all that. We've already done it. And as to Glenn's point earlier, we did that because we want to be able to move more quickly and not have so much bureaucracy for how this organization works. Otherwise, we're just not going to make any progress. And I'd like to make progress.
I appreciate that. I'm going to look to Shantine because we obviously have 2 different points of view here.
Right, and that is exactly where we come to the mention that I made of multiple reasonable interpretations here. There's obviously, if there is a difference here, that means that the contract as created is not clear enough. And what that means is that if there are disagreements about what is intended, then that should be that is rife for further discussion, because the last thing I think that's wanted or needed is fragmentation in terms of standing committees and what they're doing, and a reflection back to the roundtable that the expectations of the standing committee doesn't comport with what's drafted and written. I can't speak personally to what the initial intention was, as I was not a drafter of these documents. But what I can say is that when we look at contracts, if there are multiple reasonable interpretations, then the best thing to do is return that topic to the larger body that created those deliberative documents, whatever they happen to be, work plan, whatever the contract is, and further solidify and clarify so that there's a mutual and uniform understanding going forward. So in other words, if multiple people disagree here, I think the best thing to do is not permit those disagreements to engender and sort of escalate. I think it's better to address it head on and understand the intent of the full body. If it were agreed upon by all parties, there would be no need for that. But I don't think that's the case from what I'm hearing.
Okay, Anita, did you want to?
Sure. I think, first of all, let me thank Shantine. I think that's a good point, that ambiguities should be resolved. It's always better that way. It was my understanding that where we assigned within specific tasks that are in the work plan, where we said that the responsible or the involved parties, and I'm not looking at the work plan, so I don't remember the exact terminology we used, but we did say which resources were going to be involved in a particular issue or a particular task, and we specified a committee, then it seems to me that that committee can meet and act on that specific item without direction from the chair or the roundtable, but they are obligated to bring back any recommendations for action, and that the committees cannot on their own, the subcommittees cannot on their own take an action unless they have been separately directed to do so by the roundtable. I think also we have to recognize that everything we drafted was pre-COVID, And we're all in a new world right now. And I think, Mary Lynn, you acknowledged that basically at the very beginning of this meeting, that, you know, we're in a real different world now. And that both the practicalities of meeting, the budget issues, and so on, all argue for even a greater potential efficient use of the subcommittees to do the work and advance the work of the roundtable. So with respect to things, it seems to be that with respect to things that are in the work plan, the committee should be able to meet. If there is something new that comes up, for example, and I'm going to use the example right now of the FAA's report back to Congress on noise, and that got circulated to everybody, but that's something that's not a specific task that's in the work plan, but that it makes sense, would, I think the technical working group would look at that. It doesn't have a particular deadline, so that there's not an urgency of saying, you know, we have to get an assignment to do that like right now. But there, so it makes sense that that potentially would be at the call, you know, the chair saying, yeah, okay, you guys go ahead and deal with this, or that it even be the roundtable who say, you guys go and deal with this. But I am concerned about things that are in between. What if something had come up like that noise issue, which is not a specific task in the work plan, but is still something that in the general sense is within the scope of the roundtable, has an urgency, then we are relying on the chair to be able to move expeditiously to assign that work. And that's where I think we've got some ambiguity about, can we make sure that's going to work? And if I send a note to Mary Lynn and say, hey, I'm aware of X, it's not a work plan item, I think it's something we ought to take, and I don't hear back, just as a for example, then I can't move. And I think that's the problem, that those are the kind of the in-between things that we ought to clarify. But I do agree with Lisa that if it is an item that is in the work plan, a specific task in the work plan, where it's mentioned that that specific subcommittee is supposed to work on that thing, then it seems to me that the chair of that subcommittee can call a meeting and deal with something that's so mentioned.
Thank you for your point of view. Shantine, as it stands today, however, with this item, which is a non-action item, we are in a situation where, would you finish the sentence for me, please?
Okay, well, we're in a situation where I think you can still, let me just start off by saying this. This is a pretty broad discussion, and it was intended to be a broader discussion. So with respect to, if there's very, specific issues that either of the standing committees feel like they're not able to address, then I still think that that's better reserved for a different time. With respect to this discussion, I think my role here was to introduce the idea that the best thing to do when there are ambiguities is return to the roundtable and have it clarified, as opposed to creating fragmentary understandings of the issues as they exist. So I would just say that when I look at the work plan, I see a variety of tasks that are assigned to each group. And in contracts, the way that I read it, every word has a specific meaning. So I think we need to be careful about whether we're talking about meeting on certain items, whether we're talking about legislative or technical committee bringing them up on their agenda, and then ultimately whether those are items that they want to take action on, and that delegation may not belong to the standing committee. So I think we need to parse out what we're talking about here. I think we're overlapping a number of things. The first is, does a standing committee have the authority to bring those issues up? When I look at it, I see, for example, under the legislative committee, a line that says, the committee will also actively review and monitor proposed legislation and policy actions, et cetera. To me, review and monitor have meaning. And that doesn't mean take an action on it. That means review and monitor, and perhaps bring that item up as a discussion. And then if there's an action to be taken on it, return to the roundtable. If there's an issue where, as Anita was saying, maybe there's something that's very urgent that needs to be acted upon, the roundtable can delegate that authority back down to the standing committees. I don't see anything in the bylaws currently as they stand that says when a urgent matter arises under the jurisdiction of a standing committee, and there's no other way to broach it other than the standing committee to meet and broach it, then that is permissible. I don't read that into the contract, but that could still be the intent of the roundtable. If people disagree about that, though, what needs to happen is for it to come back to the roundtable, for there to be a discussion about the limitations on the standing committee's power to do things sua sponte, like take an action on an urgent matter. So
when it is an urgent matter, though, we have the ability of the chair by exception to assign it to that, which I did with the SST.
Right.
And so it was actually brought to me by our technical ESA, and I don't believe there was any time lost in that. So we do have an ability to still remain nimble. Again, I'm looking at 20 minutes left. I am going to need direction from our committee members as to whether we want to accept what we have heard today, perhaps make a motion to revisit this in the future, meaning all of this has to go on another agenda to be determined. And also I'd like to hear how we want to do with discussion of work plan priorities and recognizing that we have public input. We have not gotten public input on this. I've got 20 minutes. What is your pleasure, people?
Agendize it for the next meeting so that we can bring forward a proposal for how to deal with the ambiguities.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Anita, seconded by Rowena. I have got to go to public. Oh boy. Please, I love to have public input, comment. I'm going to give you all, though, just 1 minute because we do have all these other items and I think it'd be fair to you to hear them too. Robert Holbrook, 1 minute, please, if we could get the clock up.
I'm going to start with my last point, which is that I hope a roundtable member will ask council whether the practice of frequently restricting public comment to 1 minute and rarely allowing more than 2 is consistent with the Brown Act.
Okay, Robert, I will give you 2 minutes. Please keep talking. I'll give you all the time you want. Please keep talking.
Okay, I think that question is still relevant. So first, for the last few decades, large companies have been flattening their organizations, pushing decision-making down. Rather than get overly prescriptive with the roundtable determining the agendas of the committees, I suggest the roundtable clarify, as we just discussed, that the work plan and strategic plan define the direction of the roundtable, and that the committees have broad discretion to work within those confines and to develop recommendations for roundtable action. This will encourage roundtable members to volunteer for projects they care about. We'll get more done if top-down direction encourages energy in the committees and members. I would also, second, like to see the principle that we just agreed for the supersonic letter, which empowers the chairs of the roundtable and the relevant committee to act to meet a deadline at their joint discretion if a roundtable meeting doesn't intervene between the time and the deadline that's approaching. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Jennifer Landesman.
I think, you know, having been at this now for 6 years at 2 minutes at a time, I think a lot of the issues arise from not having a common understanding and a common knowledge base, for example, on NEPA and all sorts of things that you had said on your work plan that you're going to work on. So that's why we have to kind of keep going back and forth on something like SST, which kind of brought a lot of issues. It teed up like everything. So it's not that the public comment wants to interfere in your you know, wanting to add up costs and taking away your time or anything like that. It's that we really want to be able to say that we have a common understanding of things. I frankly don't think many of the members on this committee understand NEPA, how FA does NEPA very well. And I haven't seen a demonstration of that in our conversations. And when you say you want to go speak with Congress, I'm a little wondering, like, what are you going to say? You're just going to, I know you want the broad picture, but for something like the FAA doesn't measure noise. Right. So who should? Maybe the airport should. And you need to work on something like that to make sure that the right resources are allocated. So, you know, however this works out, I trust you in terms of direction and everything. But I just, I agree with Robert's first question, and just to let you know that we do wait for hours and hours, years and years, and those 2 minutes at a time is all we have. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that you, because most of you still are sending letters in, because we do read them. Darlene.
Yes, excellent to agendize this for the next meeting. I advocate a model that allows the subcommittees to be agile, delegated to, and empowered. And the last thing I would say is there's a difference of interpretation right now. So that's why you're going to agendize it. But what happens between now and that discussion? Does that mean no subcommittees can meet, or can we agree that if the subcommittees follow exactly what's in the work plan, they can at least have a meeting?
Thank you, Darlene. I will refer that to our attorney when we finish with the public comment. I think it's a good point. Jennifer T.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
A couple of things on this subcommittees. I agree with Darlene. They need to be empowered and flexible to deal with emergencies and deadlines. The roundtable meets every 2 months. So when you have situations, you need to be nimble. I agree also with Anita and Lisa that if it's in the work plan, it's fair game. And that the chairman of the subcommittee needs to set the agenda. If there's something new, they need the ability to work on it. So you might be able to put something on the agenda, kind of like an IFP general gateway agenda item, where you can deal with emergencies and still meet the Brown Act, for example, where it's just very general. And also at the end of each of the subcommittee meetings, I would recommend having some sort of agenda item, kind of like you have here with member discussion, for agenda item priorities. So that at that point, again, under the Brown Act, you're discussing, the members are discussing priorities that can then go back to the roundtable if applicable and don't have deadlines. So again, I just think there should be some nimbleness as far as the subcommittees. The other suggestion that I might have is SFO Roundtable has a technical working group. We might want to go back to them and just kind of see how they're working it. Not that I'm saying that we want to do it that way, but they may have a model that we might want to look at. Thank you.
It looks like Mary Lynn may have stepped away. Who, Evan, do we have up next?
We have a call-in from 650-690-6204.
Yes, thank you. This is Marie-Jo Fremont. So my input will be very short. I really do not understand the purpose of the strategic plan and the work plans to which this committee has devoted countless hours, and the little committee who put the draft together did an excellent work. So what would be the point of having spent so much time and having improved those if you are going to now go back every single meeting and tell each subcommittee what to work on next? That is not a proactive approach, and that will fail, and you will not deliver anything to our communities across the board. And on top of this, you have a budget crisis that you're completely ignoring. So everything that the public just said about being nimble and empowering the committees, yes, that's what you need to do. Otherwise, you will fail. You are past the 12-month honeymoon, which was a long honeymoon period. You need to deliver, and you need to empower these subcommittees. Otherwise, there is no point. You're just basically dictating exactly when they meet and what they need to work on, and that's not how work gets done these days. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else with hands raised. I'm moving back to a panelist. I see Liang.
Mute. Hello. Hi. So I feel like we are making an issue out of a non-issue. I think it's common for standing committee to not have a defined way of operating. different standing committee might operate different ways. For example, one committee might have the authority to write the letter if the position were defined by the roundtable first. Another committee might have authority to even propose the work they want to work on and bring it to the roundtable. For example, our city have legislative committee too. We define legislative platform on issues we are watching, issues we support, issues we oppose. Then the mayor will be authorized to write a letter based on the approved position. And when it's a monitored position, then the letter will be brought back to the council to decide on. So that's something that could be considered for different different standing committee. And maybe legislative committee can operate one way, a technical committee could operate another way. We don't have to specify one certain way for all the standing commission in the bylaw. And the roundtable can define always for this particular standing committee, what's the scope of their work.
Thank you, Liang. I see that Shantine has raised her hand.
So I want to address the comment by the public, if I can, regarding can standing committees meet in the meantime? There's nothing to say that they can't. I think that we all have to exercise judgment with respect to whatever ambiguities that there are here and now. Very hard for me to say whether one issue or not would that comes up would be something that is not within the jurisdiction of the standing committee or not. But I think again that has to be done with discretion, and of course I am available as counsel if that's something that someone would want to ask me. I can look into it at any point. With respect to different operations that Liang brought up, I think that's a viable plan as well. There's nothing to say that standing committees can't have that, but it would have to be drafted, something in writing that would define how those committees are going to operate differently. And then the final thing I want to say is I understand the public's comment regarding flexibility. I don't think anybody's suggesting that there can't be flexibility, and I think it would be economical to define that. But what I was brought here to talk about was the fact that there is ambiguity. So if there is ambiguity, that needs to be addressed. And I think that doesn't mean that we should say, well, there's ambiguity, so one side should prevail over the other. And ultimately, the roundtable is the governing body that's going to determine what that ambiguity means. So it doesn't have to be piecemeal. It doesn't have to be item by item. It can be whatever the roundtable determines is the level of flexibility that they want to interpret. But as I read it right now, I think that there are clearly disagreements with respect to what the standing committee is permitting to do. So what I'm here to suggest is that that is at least worked out by the parent body, by the roundtable, so that you guys can work efficiently and operationally go forward and not have to worry about it every single time.
Thank you, Shantine. Steve, I have one question for you that was brought up by one of the speakers, and that was being nimble with the IFP gateway.
Yes. And I think the comments directed at, there are times when procedures are notified and there's a publication window and there's a desire to make comment to the FA within that publication window. Certainly in the current scheme, it would be a situation where if this were to come up in between meetings as roundtable chair, on exception, you could authorize that work to be done. If it's specifically clear within the work plan that falls to one of the committees, then that committee could undertake that.
Okay, I'm going to look for a motion now because I don't think we've had it yet.
We did.
We did?
Yeah.
Good. I lost track.
I think we did. Yeah.
So actually,
Liang.
This is Liang. So I think Anita motioned to continue this to next meeting, but I would like to modify that because I don't think we should be talking about this particular item, which would amend the bylaw. What we need is to talk, maybe if there is disagreement on the scope of work for the standing committees, that's something we should talk about. If people think the standing committees should be given more power on doing certain things, that's something we should talk about. Maybe for next agenda would be define the scope of work for the two.
Is that a motion, Liang?
Committees we currently have.
Is that an alternate motion?
We lost Liang part of that, so it needs to be, I think we need it restated.
Okay. Liang, we've lost you. She seems to be frozen. Evan, can you read it, what you have so far?
Yes, I think Liang's wanted to amend Anita's motion. Anita made the motion to agendize this discussion for the next meeting. Liang suggested that we define the scope of work at the next meeting.
Anita, does that meet with your approval for an amendment? It sounds to me like it's a flushing out of the whole topic.
Yeah, I think it might need to be broader than that. I am cheered by Shantine's comment that standing committees can meet in the meantime. That we can't act, but we can meet. And that we have the latitude with discretion, obviously, due discretion, to meet. So with that's what I wanted out of today was clarity that we can at least meet. And then if we need to reduce some ambiguities in terms of what our operating parameters are and all that kind of thing, we can do that at the next meeting.
Okay.
I would just like to, about committees meeting, I would just like the reminder that when we established the roundtable, the idea was that we were going to follow what San Francisco did, a meeting on 1 month and committee meets the next month.
Andy, given COVID and given the vagaries of how the FAA sends information and changes things, we actually discussed this at some length, both when we were working on the work plan and also when we were presenting the work plan, that kind of limitation or schedule we really can't be held to. That doesn't give us enough flexibility to.
That's a budgetary impact that the entire.
I understand that, but you're assuming that there's presence of staff at all of those meetings, and I don't think we're going to assume that needs to happen necessarily. So there may not be a staff, a budgetary issue.
Okay, Evan, what's the motion on the table?
The motion was made by Anita to agendize this discussion for the next meeting. It was seconded by Rowena. Then it was amended by Liang to say that at that time, we would define the scope of work for each of the committees.
Anita, will you accept Liang's friendly amendment so we can have a full flushed out discussion?
As long as you view that as being a broad discussion, which will allow us broadly to take action, yes.
I don't know what the outcome will be of that, but I'd like to have it definitely discussed. Rowena, are you comfortable with the amendment? Good, I'm going to call the question. I'm going to call roll call, be prepared. Rowena.
Yes.
Glenn.
No.
Lydia.
Yes.
Steve.
Abstain.
Making me have a new column here. Liang. Liang, how do you vote? You seem frozen. I'll come back to you. Anita.
Yes.
Ed Bodaroff.
Yes.
Carlos.
Yes.
Michelle.
Yes.
Oops, my screen mixed up. Kathy Watanabe.
Yes.
Lisa.
No.
Okay, who froze? Liang, what's your vote? Liang?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah. Yes or no?
The internet. Yes, and I'd like to encourage the standing committee.
Sorry, the internet.
I know your internet is frozen. Can you tell us yes or no?
Hello?
Yes. Hi, Liang. Yes or no?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Are you voting yes or no or
Hi,
abstaining?
can you hear me?
Yes. Now you need to unmute, Liang. Liang, I still need a vote from you.
Unstable, yes.
Yes, okay.
And I'd like to encourage the standing committee to
sorry,
propose
internet
the scope
unstable.
of
Yes,
work they'd like to work on.
Liang,
they
I
have
need you to
control.
either hang up the phone or work just off of the computer. I'm getting a feedback, so I can't understand you.
You muted your phone. Your video's working now.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So I'd like to encourage the standing committee to propose scope of work that you'd like to work on so that you are not limited. You don't feel you are limited.
Thank you. We'll put that into the suggestion for it, for the action for the next meeting. All right, we have, it looks like 6 minutes.
Mary Lynn, can we have the vote again, please, so that everybody's clear about what it was?
I got 6 yeses, 2 nos, and 1 abstention. What do you?
Mary Lynn, what did you vote?
I voted yes.
So to me, I got
7 yes, right?
9 yeses, 2 nos, and 1 abstention, and then 1 absent.
I got, all right. We're gonna have to call it again. I came up with different numbers. Steve,
I got the same amount that Evan got.
what was that again then, please?
So
9 yeses.
9 yeses, 2 nos, 1 abstention, and 1 absent.
Correct.
Ah, okay. Andy, is that good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Motion passes.
All right. What is your desire, people? We are now at the work plan priorities. We have 5 minutes. We have oral communications. We have member discussion and review of actions taken. Any suggestions?
Have we taken general public comment for items not on the agenda?
No.
Madam Chair, I suggest we do that.
Okay. It looks like I've got a second from Glenn. Unfortunately, we're going to have to take a roll call. Rowena.
No, nothing.
I'm sorry, what?
None.
None what?
Yes or no?
She said no.
Rowena, we're voting to just skip everything over and to move to oral communications. Yes. Glenn.
Yes.
Lydia.
Yes.
Sue Preminger.
Yes.
Anita.
Yes.
Ed.
Yes.
Carlos.
Yes.
Liang.
Yes.
Michelle.
Yes.
Kathy.
Yep.
Lisa.
Yes.
Okay, good. In doing that, are we going to carry over item number 6, discussion of the work plan priorities, to upcoming meeting? Rowena.
Yes.
Glenn.
Yes.
Lydia.
Yes.
Steve.
Yes.
Anita.
Yes.
Ed.
Yes.
Carlos.
Yes.
Liang.
Yes.
Michelle.
Yes.
Kathy.
Yes.
Lisa.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Then I'm going to open up oral communications from the public.
And Madam Chair,
Yes, Steve.
I'm going to have to leave at 4. I was also hoping to get a summary from Steve about the items that we had agreed to, his summary. I don't know how we do all that in 3 minutes. I don't know how many others have to leave at 4.
Carlos looks like he has to leave. Yeah. Steve, can you give us that summation now, and then we'll open up public hearing for as long as we've got 2 minutes down for each person on the agenda.
Yeah, I think Evan's got actually the notes there. So Evan, you wouldn't mind doing it.
Okay, so Steve Preminger had made a motion to approve item, what's that? The first motion passed unanimously. The second motion passed unanimously as well for item number 3. And then item I may have to go back and I have the tally sheet, but I do not have the summary available right now.
Is it possible that that could be emailed to us after this meeting?
Yes.
Good, good. Okay. I'm going to open up oral communication, but as I do that, I'm looking to Steve and Evan and all the support group who have set up this Zoom meeting. What kind of time do we have?
We can extend past the 4 p.m. But yeah, there's a limit to the tech support on this call.
Thank you. We have in our agenda that each individual has 2 minutes to speak on any item not agendized today. And as you know, the roundtable members cannot discuss or take action on any matter raised under this agenda item. Jennifer Landesman.
Hi, so the item that I think has come up that's really important is the one from the report to Congress from FAA, which is about alternative metrics of their modeling and noise measurement practices. Yes, FAA doesn't measure noise, but I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, and I don't know how you're going to schedule it. I had not realized, and apologies, in the previous item, I didn't know that there was a proposal to make the subcommittees less flexible and all that, and I disagree with that completely. Agree with all of the members of the public about what they said, so that it could allow for time to be able to address issues like this without, you know, so many constraints, or you know, if it's really, I would be happy to organize maybe something outside of the roundtable as just a conversation about the topic for people that want to learn about it. But pretty much we've got to get to that point of where we're talking about how the FAA practices how it practices environmental assessments and all that. And this report is very consequential to that. And I want to thank the FAA for that report. I don't think that Section 173 has been fulfilled, but I appreciate the effort that went into responding to 188. And I thought it was very well organized, and it provides a great framework for discussions going forward that can address public concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Holbrook.
Thank you. First, I'd agree with what Jennifer Landesman just said. The report that the FAA produced is an important basis for conversation that impacts us. I'd like to suggest that in advance of the next meeting, when we talk about priorities, the committees may want to consider the items on the agenda, not in terms of a single metric, which is priority, high, medium, or low, but in terms of 2 metrics. One is importance, and the other is urgency. I think high, medium, and low, in my experience, blurs things and makes it difficult to have helpful conversations about what needs to be scheduled. Urgency and importance is much more helpful. Finally, I'd like to suggest a new item to consider, and that is, it comes from the EIR for the SJC expansion, which showed that in 2018, the 737-800 and 737-8 MAX planes together comprised 30% of operations at San Jose Airport. So it was disturbing to read in the EIR that the 8 MAX creates the same noise, but over twice as many acres on arrival as the 800. Please consider writing to the airlines stating our community's concern that their purchase decisions could potentially double the number of residents affected on arrival. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer T.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
In the agenda packet, page 344, Darlene wrote an excellent letter to the Roundtable, and I just kind of wanted to reiterate, in case she did not, that at the February 26th meeting, the FAA asked that their question period be extended from 30 days in advance to 45 days. That poses a problem since in the IFP gateway, the comment period is 60 days. So she made a recommendation, which I think is appropriate, that this body somehow deals with, either through a letter or whatnot, that our SCSC Roundtable write a letter of some sort stating that the problems with the FAA new 45-day requirement for questions can pose a problem for the IFP gateway and our reaction to it within a given amount of time, especially given the 2-month period between meetings. So I just wanted to reiterate her excellently written letter. Thank you.
Thank you. Darlene.
Yes, FAA Administrator Dixon wrote a multi-page response to the Quiet Skies Caucus. It's posted on the Roundtable website. He offered to meet twice a year with the caucus, and one of those meetings should be before August. I would like the Roundtable or the subcommittees to consider what items should be forwarded to our congressionals as part of that meeting, because it's an excellent venue. My second topic, and this may surprise you because it surprised me, the subject line of emails in the packet, which is called the date of FAA announcement regarding FAA's progress on Surfer. Steve sent an email to Gervin about when the FAA expects to present on the Big Sur overlay. Favi then forwarded that email to Chapman, which is Eshu's office, asking her for guidance. Page 284 of the packet, Chapman sent an email to Favi. Obviously, the office is busy, but the last sentence is what shocked me, which is it said, "I checked and we have not heard from any constituents seeking an update on this issue." I repeat, I checked and we have not heard from any constituents seeking an update on this issue. I don't know about you, but I think this topic has come up at every single meeting since this roundtable has started. So there should be zero ambiguity to the FAA, to congressionals, to anyone that we want answers and an update on the Big Sur overlay. I do know that the Roundtable has not sent a formal letter with questions about the Big Sur overlay. If you look at the matrix tracking document on the website, no formal letter is sent. If it is needed to have a formal letter so that there's no ambiguity that the citizens in the Roundtable want the FAA to present and answer questions, please vote and do so, because we think you're representing us and we're not contacting our congressionals.
Thank you, Darlene. Normally, we would not respond to items that come up through oral communication, but Steve, I would like you to respond to what Darlene just talked about, Surfer and the Big Sur overlay.
I'll be real brief. I think it's been very clear since last fall that the Roundtable very much wants a briefing from the FAA on the Surfer Big Sur issue. We had members of the FAA at our December meeting indicate that they would be able to give a presentation after the quarterly report was pulled together on the select committee recommendations. I think we initially targeted February, and then we're looking at April. So that it is very clear that the FAA knows that this is something that the Roundtable is interested in, and certainly if as a very quick agenda item at the next meeting, the Roundtable could have authorized the chair to write a letter to the FAA to make it clear that the Roundtable wants this update.
Thank you, Steve. Do we need to vote on that?
You wouldn't do it here because it's not agendized.
No, I meant vote to have it on the next agenda.
I move we put Surfer on the next agenda.
Thank you, Anita. Do I have a second? Evan, can you take the time clock down? I can't see anyone. Thank you. Okay, I have a motion on the floor from Anita asking that we agendize that.
I'll second it.
Was that you, Lydia?
Rowena.
I'm
No,
sorry.
it's Rowena.
Rowena, thank you. Okay, I'll call roll again. Rowena,
Yes.
Glenn,
No, I don't think we need to do a vote every time we put something on the agenda. That you, as the chair, you do that all the time. No.
Lydia,
Yes.
Anita,
Yes.
Ed,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
Kathy,
Yes.
Lisa,
Yes.
Liang. I know, Glenn, do you want to have a weigh in or not? It's the Zoom meeting situation, so I'll take it as an abstention. Okay.
No, I voted no.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's what I said. No, because we don't need to do it this way.
Okay, thank you. All right. Steve, any follow-up remarks?
No.
All right. I will then look to Andy about a potential date possibility for meeting again.
Madam Chair, Lydia has her hand up. She's had it up.
Oh, thank you. I'm off of that page right now. Lydia, yes, thank you.
So I actually have comments in member discussion. So when that comes up, may I speak, please?
We voted to bypass that and go directly to oral communication.
Even that, I thought it was just item 5. Okay, never mind then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, then.
Mary Lynn, hold on, I'm just, Liang, did you want to speak? Did you get a vote from Liang? She's having problems with Wi-Fi.
I did get a vote, yes.
Okay, great.
Andy?
Yes.
Next meeting?
Well, the next meeting would be scheduled for July. Correct?
Live, virtual? What did you say?
July.
Oh, July. Yes, thank you.
Sorry. And following in the same path that we're on, the 4th Wednesday,
July 22nd.
July 22nd.
Assuming we will still be doing it by Zoom.
I would assume so.
Charlene, did you need to speak? You lit up. That's all okay, thank you. All right, then I will look for a motion to adjourn to July 22nd.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Rowena. Do I have a second?
Not necessary for a motion to adjourn.
Whatever. I want to make sure that everybody's on board with this idea. Okay, I'm not going to call the roll call. I think we're all anxious to go on. Thank you all for being here today and for participating. I really appreciate you taking the time. And for those of you who haven't left from Santa Cruz County, I wish you all the best over there, as I wish all of us over here as we deal with what comes forward. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you all.